And then there's Hawthorn, a club that will see change at the top. There's been a handful of clubs throughout the year who have attempted change, blasting a board out or building a scenario of signing waivers and petitions and the like. Hawthorn has done it tremendously effectively, it would seem, through the Hawks for Change movement. One of the central figures is Andy Gowers. He's about to join me in the studio as Jeff Kennett ponders his final phase at Hawthorn. One of the central figures in this is a premiership player at the Hawks. He served as a board member previously. Andy Gowers. Andy, welcome into the studio.
Thanks, Gerard. Good to be here.
Why the need for change at Hawthorn in your eyes?
Well, I just felt that talking with a few old mates, old players and so on, we just sort of formed the opinion that change was due. And, so I put my hand up and made a commitment to do whatever I could. And whether that meant a formal position or an informal position, whatever was required. I mean, football clubs these days are very big organisations, but they rely on volunteers. They're membership-based organisations as well. So ultimately they serve the members. And I just felt like I had something to give, having been on the board previously. And, so I put my hand up and begun discussions with the club about how I could help.
It feels like Hawks for Change has been very effective. There's been a few clubs who have had groups who have wanted to make moves, and it's been very difficult. In some ways, it's been quite ham-fisted. This seems very effective, and in the online rally you had last night, how would you describe the mood that is being collected at the moment?
Look, I think the mood is fantastic, and the reason I say that is that I haven't been involved in one conversation with a raised voice. It's been very congenial, it's been very collegiate, it's been very positive. We've been talking about the ways to improve our football club, which is dear to us. Everybody has that common goal. And as a result, the expression, the club is bigger than all of us has never been more true. And everybody is prepared to do whatever they can. Now, whether that's a member, submitting ways that they think the club can improve, and then that's all taken on board by those that get access to that information and get the feedback. So I think the mood is really good. I think Hawks for Change have played a pivotal role in bringing the conversation to a head. And, we're now in a position where there's an agreed process for change at the top level. And I'm sure there'll be other changes that roll out over time that are in the best interest of the club.
How central to this is the notion that Jeff Kennett's time as president was up?
Well, that's only one factor, really. But Jeff's acknowledged that it's time to hand over the baton, and we now have an agreed process for that to happen with a deadline next year, and that's a good outcome for the club. And I think now the process begins where we need to find the best person to replace Jeff and be the best president that we can find to run to be at the top of the tree, as it were. So that's been a pretty important step.
At various stages, Jeff wanted to depict the dissenting voices at Hawthorn as just a handful, and in fact a handful that he'd received and he'd placated along the way. Is that a misrepresentation of the way that Hawthorn members feel?
Look, I think the general mood, I mean, I'm not in touch with 77,000 people, obviously, but the people that have spoken to me, and I have had a lot of communication with all kinds of great Hawthorn people. I think the general mood is, it's time for change, and people are prepared to do what they can to help, and that's a good thing. And I've said before that having multiple candidates for two positions on a board is actually a good thing. You want some competitive tension, and Simon Taylor and I have had some good communication ourselves, and we both agree it's a healthy situation to have more candidates than positions, and so the club can then work through that, and you can have very productive discussions based around that, and then work out what you want to do. So as a result, all right, I've made it clear that now that I'm prepared to take on whatever role is required of me in terms of helping the club, And that looks like being on the nominations committee, not on the board itself. So that's an example. You get better outcomes for the club with more people interested in putting their hand up.
Are there issues for Hawthorn to confront? Is the pokies one of them? Is it the source of some angst that while a lot of clubs have tried to move away from pokies revenue, Hawthorn regimentally hasn't?
Look, I think that is an issue, and I know it's an issue that the club is working through. So it's not something that is being ignored, to my knowledge. And the challenge is replacing revenue. And the other thing I should say too is I've been to the venues that Hawthorn owns when I was on the board. And yes, there are poker machines involved, but there's also food and beverage and entertainment and a hotel and accommodation and events, all kinds of other revenue streams. Pokies is a revenue stream though, and I know Ian Silk's view and my view, and I presume the club's view ultimately is that the family club shouldn't be involved in poker machines, but the revenue and so on that has flowed from those business interests has been an important pillar in making sure the club is financially stable. So there's a challenge there to meet. So what we need to do, I think, it sounds simple, but it's harder to achieve, is find alternative revenue streams to make sure the club is financially viable and successful, stable, whilst easing out of the poker machine interest. So we've seen other clubs do it successfully. And, it won't be my personal call, obviously, but I'm of the view that we should continue to investigate alternative ways to make sure the club is financially stable, where eventually we don't have any poker machine interests.
If everything goes smoothly, when would a new president be installed?
Well, sometime between now and the AGM next year, I'd reckon. So we've nominated the time of, Jeff did last week, of the 30th of June to identify a successor. There would need to be a handover period, and depending, I presume a handover period for someone who's already on the board. If the next president is already sitting on the board now, that would be quicker than someone who isn't currently sitting on the board. So that would probably need to be factored in. But yeah, I'd say in that time period, and yeah, we did put a deadline on it because that just makes commercial sense, I think. So 30th of June next year is when we've identified, also when we've stipulated the time to identify a successor, and there will be a handover period that'll be necessary, and that's just good governance, I think, to give someone the right time to get the feet under the desk, and then we'll announce that, appoint that person, and then the members get to have their say next year at the AGM.
Andy, thanks for coming in and walking us through it.
Pleasure. Good on you, Gerard.